Hello, everybody. This is Grace Cho, CEO of Entrepreneur, Creative Careers Podcast, where we help creatives succeed. Today, we have a treat. I speak to a good friend and a brilliant architect, Rich Granoff. Rich Granoff is the founder and CEO of Granoff Architects, a leading architectural firm in Greenwich, Connecticut. Since its inception in 1989, Rich has grown the company into a thriving design studio with over 30 top professionals. Today, Granoff Architects offers design services throughout the country in 4 disciplines: residential architecture, commercial architecture, interior design, and landscape architecture. He is widely recognized as an industry leader, and as a result, he and his firm have received many design awards. He's been featured in national television, such as Good Morning America, MTV Cribs, The New York Times, and many, many magazines. Rich has lectured in sustainable design. He is an active real estate developer and focuses on sustainability and green design, which are very important topics to me. So it is such a treat. Welcome, Rich.
Thanks, Grace. Pleasure, and thanks for having me on your show.
Well, it's such a great thrill. Now, this is a question I usually like to ask all my guests. Where did you go to school? What did you study? And what drew you into this field?
I was growing up on Long Island in my neighborhood. I was a little kid and they were building houses. And I thought it was really cool just seeing houses being built. And I used to go hang out at the construction sites and started having lunch with the construction workers. And that just got ingrained in my head that you could actually build something in real life that people get to live in. And at the ripe old age of 13, I came home to my house and I said to my parents, I want to be an architect. And they looked at me like I was crazy because I come from a blue collar family and they didn't see architecture coming. But from that moment on, I just started reading magazines. I actually got into sustainable energy at that point in the 70s when solar started happening. And then when it came time for college, I only applied to architecture schools and ended up going to the Syracuse University School of Architecture. And that's architecture is a 5-year Bachelor of Architecture program. And I didn't realize how intense it was going to be, but I jumped into the pool and I survived the 5-year program. And I studied architecture, which is a pretty elaborate schooling, as you can imagine, because there's a design track, and then there's technology, and then there's history. So there's a lot of different buckets of study to become an architect.
You knew early on. That's incredible. At the age of 13.
Definitely knew pretty early, and again, I don't know. Really know where it came from, but
Was anybody in your family an architect?
Nope.
No.
No architecture anywhere. There's some music, musicians, and creative types and photographers, but anyway, now I have a son that's an architect. There you go. So,
Passing down the tradition. That's wonderful. What would you say to your younger self now that you've been in this racket for a long time? What would you tell him about this discipline?
Not much different than I did. I just knew I wanted to do it and then stuck to it. As I said, it's a tough road to become an architect. After you graduate from college, then you need to do a 3-year apprenticeship or internship, which is also a low-paying situation. And then after that, you're entitled to take a grueling licensing exam, which is issued by the state, and that's also usually a 1 or 2 year process because it's a 6-part exam. So it's a 10-year commitment. It's almost like saying I want to be a doctor, and you have to really want to do it and commit to it. And that's what I would say to myself: stick to it if you love it. I know a lot of people who call me and say their child wants to be an architect. What's your advice? Et cetera. And I'm like, first make sure you really are committed to what's ahead, because it's not it sounds sexy, but it's a hard road to get there. And then even once you do all that, it's not the highest paying profession. But then again, the job satisfaction is, I think, one of the highest of any professions.
Well, that's an important point, because if it's hard, if it's difficult, it's not always the money. Where do you draw the fulfillment from? You mentioned job satisfaction. How do you define that?
Well, it's a fun profession in that you're creating things. You're building things. You're changing people's lives by the buildings you create, usually or hopefully. I drive around town now and I see all my buildings around, and it's like they're my children, and it's like, wow, I built that. There's a concrete satisfaction to it, as opposed to being like a stockbroker or whatever it might be, or a lawyer. It's there's a lot of paper being pushed around, and granted, you're helping people and providing a service, but architecture, you're providing a service, and then there's an end product, if you will, right? There's a building or a space or restaurant or whatever it might be. So I think that's one of the reasons job satisfaction is high. The pay is relatively low because that's the industry, like a lot of creative industries. That's just the way it is. And I say relatively, but it's all relative, isn't it?
Yes.
Salary, so.
So when you look back on your prior projects, has your approach changed or evolved at all?
Well, that's a good question. So, approach, I tend to, well, I have a saying, it's like, it's all architecture. Where that comes from is it doesn't matter whether I'm hired to design a doghouse or design a 30-story building. The process is actually very similar in architectural design, which is, we're given usually a site, a piece of property or a piece of land or a spot in the city, a site that our client owns or wants to own. And then we have what we call a program. The program is, what do I want to build here? Is it a doghouse? Is it an apartment building? Is it an office tower? What? That's the program. And then there is always the schedule and the budget. How fast does this have to happen, and how much do we have to spend? And then again, you design it and then you get it built. So the process is actually the same. What's evolved for me over my 30 plus years in the business is you always start out a career doing small things. And for me, my earliest projects were what I call commercial interiors projects. They were, restaurant, office interior, lobby renovation, whatever, and also some houses. Or we started out doing house renovations way back in the beginning. And to this day, we still do commercial interiors and house renovations. That said, over the years, the project started getting bigger and more complex, and house renovations led to new homes, and new homes led to very big new homes, and an apartment renovation led to an apartment building, and a small apartment building led to a big apartment building. So the point is, the process has been the same, but now we're doing larger projects. But we don't do things very differently than we used to. Other than now we have technology that we didn't have 30 years ago, right? So when I first started, I was drawing with a pencil, using an eraser, and obviously now we're using computers and doing 3D modeling. But those are just tools. Those don't really change the design process significantly.
Interesting. And aside from the tools, do you see the architecture market, sort of the industry, changing in any way? What are some of the current trends as you look out to the world of architecture?
I tend not to follow trends, but obviously, as I said before, technology has affected really every aspect of the design and construction field. In that we have tools now on the design side, as I mentioned, we have 3D modeling and CAD systems, which just allow us to be more efficient in our design time. If I was drawing a building back in the beginning and it had 100 windows, I had to draw each of those windows, separately by hand. Now you create one window, or you grab a window out of a library, and then you just copy it 100 times. So you spend less time doing tasks, and now we spend more time in actual design, and obviously dealing with clients and the whole process of design. And then on the construction side, similarly, technology has helped the whole construction process with communication tools and Zoom meetings and on-site cameras, et cetera. And then also technology has enabled us to have a whole host of new materials, what we call composites. We use very little wood anymore. There's a lot of new products that are fabricated using computers and complex shapes that are 3D printing and things like that just have evolved the world of design and construction. But, we still build a building from the ground up, and it's still a little bit of an ancient craft, if you will.
Mm-hmm. We mentioned in your bio that your focus is sustainability and green design, and I know a little bit about that, but for those who may not be so familiar, what is green design?
So, it's a lot of different things. We use the term greenwashing, and that some people or some, developers just use the whole green sustainable angle as a marketing tool. But, sustainable design goes back a long way. I mentioned, like, early in my career, I got into solar energy. Sustainability is really a holistic way of designing and building, with the overarching theme of sustainability is energy usage, is using less or zero energy in operating a building, right? So, if you go back 20, 30 years, energy was cheap, and no one really focused on energy efficiency, and houses weren't insulated, and cars got 10 miles to a gallon, et cetera. Fast forward as energy has gotten more expensive, and we now realize, or some of us realize, that there's something called climate change. So the fact is that buildings are responsible for 35% of the carbon emissions in the world, right?
Mm.
How is that? Buildings have to be heated and cooled and use electricity and fossil fuels to be heated and cooled. The core of sustainability, sustainable design, is lowering the carbon footprint of a building. And the low-hanging fruit is what we call the building envelope, and that is the outer walls and glass. And now we super insulate the outer walls, and we have super high performing glass, so that probably a typical building these days uses 25%. A new building uses 25%, I would say, to 35% of the energy, because the thermal envelope is so robust that the amount of heat loss or cooling loss is reduced significantly by having a robust thermal envelope. The other half of the coin there is how the heating and cooling is actually accomplished. And we really use very little fossil fuels these days, which means we don't have a lot of oil tanks and oil in buildings. We don't have a lot of gas and gas supply. It's actually headed towards more electric heat pumps, we call them, that are super efficient. Electric appliances and convection cooktops instead of gas. And besides the whole energy efficiency piece, there's also the fossil fuels. So a gas stove in a kitchen, for example, which is being phased out in many municipalities, including New York City. And there's even been discussion of nationally going that direction. When a gas stove, when the pile light's burning in your house, it's off-gassing. It's providing noxious fumes in the house. So a whole other bucket of sustainability and green design is related to healthy air, right? Healthy buildings, if you will. And then there's a few other smaller buckets of sustainability, which are materials, using recycled materials, using locally sourced materials. So I can put a granite countertop in that comes from Vermont, or I can put a granite countertop in that comes from China. Obviously, if it's coming from China, it's going to, have a long trip on a boat, which is not necessary because I can get granite that's just as nice from Vermont. So that's locally sourced materials. And another one is water usage. So as we know, there's a pretty big worldwide water shortage. We take it for granted where we are because you turn the faucet on and the water comes out. But in many parts of the world, water is scarce. In many parts of the United States, water is scarce. So we now use low flow plumbing fixtures that use half the water. And we recycle what we call gray water. So let's, for example, water running off your roof would typically go into a leader and then go into the sewer system. But instead, we can take the water off of a roof and store it in a tank underground on your property, and that same water can be used for irrigation for your landscaping. So instead of wasting water and then buying more water, you're using the water. It's kind of a double success reusing that water. So those are some of the basic tenets of sustainable and green design.
It's so fascinating. I love that, especially after COVID, where I think COVID forced us to look at life slightly differently and really focus on the true meaning of priorities and things like that. Have you seen a difference in the way buildings are architected after COVID?
Yeah, the biggest one, well, there's a couple, but the biggest is work from home, right? We usually have had an office in a house that we build, or a nook, or what we call a Zoom room in apartments. But now, you need multiple. You need two offices when you're building a house, and a co-working space in an apartment building, et cetera. So the work from home thing has not only mandated that we have more space to work, dedicated space to work in a house, because as we know, you kind of need some quiet, or be able to close a door to get work done at home, especially if there's kids and pets and spouses and other people around. So we definitely dedicate more space to remote working. That's really been one of the biggest post-COVID. The other one is that just people are spending more time at home. I saw a trend for years of houses getting smaller and smaller and apartments getting smaller and smaller. Now I'm seeing it kind of shift back up, at least a little bit, that the typical homes are doing, because they have two offices and maybe even some more work at home space. And apartments as well, you really need if you got a small 1-bedroom apartment, you really don't want to be working at the kitchen counter. So we try to dedicate a work at home space and in all of our projects now.
That's wonderful. Architecture is so fascinating to me because it is sort of such an important indicator of how life is in a particular part of the world. And it's all reflected in the way we work and live and play. It's all about those spaces and how they're designed. It tells you a lot.
Yeah, and look, I mean, you could say culturally, what buildings look like are a reflection of a place and a time. Culturally,
It's so true.
in a wealthy society, the buildings are all, spectacular and, shiny and, and you go to poorer parts of the world and people are living in mud huts, right? And it's
Exactly.
all architecture that reflects, place and the time. And even materials tend to be locally sourced. That mud hut, the reason they're building mud huts is because that's all they got. Whereas in the U.S. and Canada, we have forests and we can build out of wood,
Hmm.
et cetera. You go to Florida, we build out of concrete only because there's no wood. So it is a very localized art, if you will.
Art. I know you're an avid art collector. Tell us about how you got into art collecting. What kind of art do you like? Most importantly, how does art change a space when you're designing either commercial or residential?
Sure. Well, quickly, I got into art when I first got married a while ago. My wife's family actually had a small gallery, and my wife grew up with art. I didn't grow up with art, but going to architecture school, I studied a lot of art and architecture, so I knew a lot about it. And my wife and I literally started collecting when we got married, and we would typically buy a piece a year. At the time, we were into Keith Haring and Lichtenstein, and mostly pop art and post World War II types of artists. We bought a Warhol, and these were small pieces, and we
Hmm.
just enjoyed them and enjoyed the visual aspect of them. And then really over the years, we've amassed a decent collection that now includes a bunch of kind of what I'm going to say unknown modern artists that are known in the art world, but they're not household names. And the pieces have gotten more diverse. We have some photography that we enjoy. We have some sculpture that we enjoy. So we're really into it. And we built a new home a couple of years ago. And you asked about art in the space versus how art influences architecture. We literally designed a few places in the house for specific pieces of art, knowing that we had a 8 foot long piece by a certain artist. We needed an 8 foot wall, and that doesn't you need to design that in as well as lighting for all of the art that we have in our house. So
Hmm.
I was very careful in making sure all the places that art was going had the proper lighting and also not being exposed to direct sunlight. So that's kind of another one. And now we're doing a bunch of landscaping, and we're actually planting a sculpture garden in our front yard, and we have kind of spots identified of where we'd like to have sculptures, and we're kind of in the market to buy a sculpture, a steel outdoor sculpture now. So and I've had clients where we have had collections, and I'm actually doing a house in Dallas right now for a collector, and he's got a piece that is 12 foot by 12 foot oil.
Mm.
It's a pretty big piece. And so the entry hall is 16 feet tall just to accommodate this piece of art. It's right when you walk in, there it is. So that's a good example of designing, architecture around art. The flip side is if I'm designing a museum, and I haven't designed a museum, but if you design a museum, you need, large wall spaces and proper lighting and flexibility, I would say as well, right, is one of the hallmarks of designing around art. Now, I've also designed around furniture, like collectible types of furniture. One of my clients had a sofa that we had to, fit. So we actually did an oversized room to fit the sofa. Sometimes there's a oversized dining table and things like that. So, or
Hmm.
a cherished light fixture we've done, that can also be art.
Well, I was going to ask the question when you're designing a room, do you pick the furniture first and then the art, or the art before the furniture?
Well, it depends on the client, and if they say I have this piece, I want to go in this room, or if it's a piece of furniture. So we work many different ways,
Right.
but we always consider furniture when we design rooms. And in fact, some architects ignore it early on in the planning stage. They just do rooms and say we'll figure that out later. To me, it's very important to understand how a room is being furnished. It can really change the space. Typically there's at least one wall in a room that you could put something on. And but I
Right.
do have the conversation with my clients early on, and many of them are collectors, so it's not
Hmm.
not surprising. So different than cars. I mean, I have clients that collect cars, And then, how many car garage do you want, right? I mean, and I've done up to 20, 30, but oftentimes it's, 4, 6, 8. And then we have to figure out where all the cars are going. Sometimes we stack them. Cars can be art also, as you know, as collector cars.
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of client and their wishes and all of that, from your point of view, is there a particular project that when you look back that you're very, very proud of and one that you would share with your grandkids someday? What is a project that you really are just like,
Well, yeah, there's a bunch. They're not all, they're all kind of like my children. But the building that I'm sitting in now is my office building that I own. It's a landmark building in Greenwich, Connecticut. It's called the Granoff Architects Building now, mostly because I put my name on it, and that's what it's called.
yes?
It was a cool project because it's a 100-year-old former electric company building, and it was built in the 20s. And the electric company basically had it for 95 years, and they said we no longer need this building, and I bought it. It's a historic building. It's brick. It's actually an Art Deco style brick building that I completely gutted. I restored it. The exterior was restored and won a bunch of historic awards for the work we did on the outside. But on the inside, it's a really cool, modern, kind of funky office space for me, and also we have a bunch of tenants in the building, so it's cool because it's kind of a landmark in town at this point in Greenwich, Connecticut. But at the same time, I get to come to work in it every day, and I own it. I'm a landlord, so it kind of feels good all around. And my grandkids will definitely, they'll own it because I'm never selling it. Or maybe my kids will sell it though. So who knows?
Very proud of it. That's wonderful. Is there a dream project that you wish to do if you were king of the world for a day? What is that dream project?
Well, I think every architect dreams of doing that big skyscraper. Haven't done it yet. We've done a couple of 8 and 10-story buildings, and we have a couple of 20-story buildings on the boards that we're designing that haven't gotten built yet. So that's kind of an easy one. But I'm just starting to work on one that I think might be my dream project. It's a resort on an island in Anguilla.
Oh,
And it's a 500-acre property, and the client wants to turn it into literally he wants it to be the nicest resort in the Caribbean.
mm,
And it's got all these components. It's got a hotel, and it's got villas, and it's got houses and restaurants and a small golf course and a helicopter pad. So it's just starting to work on it, and I hope it'll come to fruition. It should. That's a dream project. There you go. And I get to go
that
to
sounds
Anguilla.
amazing.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
I can't wait to see it when it's done.
Me too.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. How long do these kinds of what's the time span? I'm sure there's a range, but like
Oh yeah.
start to finish, what's the
Well,
range?
our smaller projects, which as I started out by saying is a commercial interior or a home renovation, can be 6 months to a year. That's from when you say start design to when
Mm,
you move in, and you're done. Our average projects are 2 to 3 years, which would be a significant new home or an apartment building, a modest apartment building project, and that 2 to 3 years. And then the bigger projects like the Anguilla Resort, and I have another resort project I'm working on. Those are literally 10-year projects. And by the way, a skyscraper is a 10-year project.
mm.
And that's about as long as it gets, unless it's a multi-phase, ongoing, multi-building type of project. But, average 2 to 3 years and up to 10 years. And it's a long time to be spending with a client and a team and
It is
cast of characters.
very long.
But one of the things I love about what I do is every project's different. It's never the same. There's different people. There's different sites. There's, everything's different. The aesthetics are always different. And we almost never do the same thing twice. I mean,
Mm,
we don't have a specific style, if you will, because, it just depends on a lot of things. Left alone, we'd like everything to be modern and cool and funky, but it's not for everybody. So some places we have to tone it down a little bit. And there's also a whole piece I didn't really talk about of what we call entitlements or approvals. It's not just what we want to do and what our client wants to do. It's what the town or the city will let us do. And we have to go through a whole process of getting an approval. Literally anything and everything we do as architects needs a permit. So it's just a matter of whether it's a simple building permit or whether it's a multi-year process of going through various agencies and different constituent groups.
As a field of architect, when you look out in your field, are there things that they should be doing more of that you're not seeing?
In general, the architectural profession is tasked with leading the charge on sustainability in buildings, right? That's all we can control is buildings. The
Right.
automobile industry and or the government regulating the automobile industry is charged with, sustainability in that field. And then there's the oil companies and everything else. So the regulation helps. But architecture as a profession, we feel it is our obligation to educate our clients and to make our buildings as sustainable as they can be. Not all architects either feel it's critical or whatever it might be, feel they have the time or they have excuses why they don't further the cause, if you will. Granted, there's some client pushback in certain instances for all kinds of reasons. I don't want to get into politics, but our job is to make our buildings as green as possible,
Hmm.
every project. And
Hmm.
so that's a big part of the architectural profession is helping solve this global crisis that we're going through.
It is an incredible field if you think about it. It is the ultimate convergence of cultural, social, financial, historical. There's science and there's technology. It's all like mushed into one thing.
Well, what I say, it's right brain, left brain. There's not a lot of fields that you need to go right brain, left brain. And you need to have it both, and that's part of the schooling. It's a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm not good at math. I can't be an architect." You definitely can. You need to have a mathematical mind, but I don't sit here and do trigonometry all day long. And at the
No.
other extreme, a lot of people come to architecture through the artistic side. I'm a good draftsman. I can I can sketch. I can create. I have a creative mind. That's the other extreme. That's good and that helps, but that doesn't make you an architect either. So I consider myself right down the middle. Is that I'm okay at both ends of the spectrum, and you need to know a little bit about a lot of things. How's that to be an architect?
It's absolutely true. It's a very complex field. And with that, if some young person comes to you today and says, I want to be an architect, what advice do you give them?
Well, I get this a lot. I'm happy to speak to almost anybody that says they want to be an architect. What I tell them in a nutshell is, here's the good news: it's a fun profession, and you get to build things, and it's the job satisfaction is really high. That's the good news. The bad news is schooling's a bitch, and you're going to make less money than most people that worked in hard at school. So that's the beginning of the spiel. The next thing I advise everybody that's a high school student that says they're interested in architecture, do a summer program in architecture. So almost all of the major architecture schools, and there aren't a lot, there's a handful, they mostly offer what they call a summer program for high school students. And I think they offer it 2 years. I think it's sophomore to junior and junior to senior, the summer. And my son, who said he wanted to be an architect, I sent him to two different summer programs. I sent him to Pratt and to Syracuse. And from those programs, there's three responses. One is, I love this, I want to do it. The second is, I love this, but I'm not sure I want to commit to the schedule. And the third is, I thought I loved this, but I don't.
Mm.
And no matter what comes out of that, it's all good, because you don't want to think, you want to go to architecture school and then get there and be like, whoa, this is not what I signed up for. So it's just a tough program. That's all. And I'm not making this up. It's very well known in the profession that the schooling is incredibly hard. If you talk to any student that, like Cornell, for example, has a great architecture school. You talk to anybody at Cornell, they'll say, "Oh, the architecture students, we never see them. They're over in that building over there, and they never come out." So it's
Oh my
pretty funny,
goodness.
but it's true. So
I have a newfound respect for architects that they really have a love for what they do.
to me, I could never do anything else, and I'm glad I decided to do it. But it's I'm having fun, so it's all good.
It's wonderful. Is there a project that you're working on now that you can share that you'd love to talk about, or no? Too
Yeah,
top
I'm
secret?
talking about any of my projects. I just signed up a couple of projects in Providence, Rhode Island, which is a city that I only knew from studying it. Historic city, an old mill town, if you will. and a partner of mine, actually, a development partner. We didn't talk about real estate development, but I do that in my spare time. I do that. So a partner called me and said, a friend of his in Portland, called and said he's got a line on some great buildings that could be converted. So I took a trip up to Providence a couple of weeks ago, and old mill buildings and a downtown really cool late 1800s office building. And long story short, we're looks like we're going to buy them, and I'm in the middle of literally on my desk right now. I'm trying to figure out how to convert these buildings to apartment buildings, and that's just it's kind of a puzzle of using what's there and figuring out how it's all going to work and how many apartments can I get in this building. So it's adaptive reuse again, as we talked about, but it's a new city for me, and so I'm excited about that.
That's wonderful. And from what I know about your work, not only are they, just top-notch design, but they're also so beautiful. So you have that visual impact when you walk into your spaces. So you do a great job of that as well.
Thank you. Beauty is an eye of the beholder, but I appreciate that.
That's wonderful. It's so wonderful. Rich, it's been such an incredible pleasure. I would love to invite you back at some point and give us an update of where you are.
Happy
Would that
to
be
do that.
okay?
It's all good.
Rich, thank you so much for your time today. I know you're a busy guy, so we really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Grace. My pleasure.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you so much. This is Grace Cho from Archpreneur, signing off. Bye-bye.